allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you would remain standing for a second. Joe.
I'd like to have a moment of silence for our departed treasurer, Marty Carrier. Thank you.
Thank you. You may be seated. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to be describing the process that we'll be following for tonight's meeting. It's no different than any prior Village District meeting, but we have a lot of new faces here. Every registered voter should have one of these cards. You'll be using it when you need to vote and when you come up to speak. Don't lose it. If you leave, either take it with you or drop it at the front table here. You should also have 3 ballots. One of these, and one of these, each one of these. You'll be using these later after I open the election to vote for Articles 2 and 3 and the election of officers. After this introduction, I will be recognizing the chair to introduce the front table, and then there will be a few presentations given. Questions will be taken during the presentation, but only on the presentation only, not on the wording of articles that the presentations may be covering. Each article will be read as printed on the warrant and must be moved to be discussed. The motion to move is only valid if seconded by another voter. Both voters must raise their card and state their name clearly so it can be recorded for the minutes. The motioner will be given the first opportunity to speak to the article. Then after that, other people may get in line and speak to the article. You may come up, ask a question, make a comment, or make an amendment to the article. When you do that, make sure you state your name clearly, and if you are making an amendment, please have that amendment in writing, and there's something up here if you need to write it down so I can get that. Let's see what else I got here. If an amendment is made, we will be discussing the amendment until it is completed, which means we will be discussing it, we'll be voting on whether to pass it or whether to not pass it, and then we'll continue with the amendment. A simple majority is required to pass an amendment. When I ask you to vote on it, I will be asking you to raise your card. Yes, and raise your card no. If the count is close, I may ask you to raise your cards again, and we'll be counting the numbers. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Voting on Articles 4 through 7 will be done via a show of cards. Article 2 and 3 involve bonds, and that's why they have the special ballot cards that you will have to be placed in the ballot boxes in the back. When Article 2 is discussed, and when it is done, I am going to suggest that we hold off voting on Article 2 and discuss Article 3 at the same time, finalize that, and then everyone is allowed to go and vote at that time. It will speed up the process. We have a lot of people here trying to get back to only 2 ballot boxes. At that time, you will mark your ballots either with a pen you have, there are some pens in the back, put them in the ballot boxes and come back and take your seat, and we will continue with the rest of the meeting. Also, Article 2 and 3 require bonds, and the state requires that the ballot box be open for 1 hour after I open the ballot boxes. So it's going to be an hour until everything is done before the ballots can be closed and you have a chance to actually put your in. You don't have to run back right away. That's what I'm saying. And as usual, please be polite when others are speaking. Please be respectful of others' opinions and their right to have them. Please keep your comments on the issues, not on the people. Please only speak when recognized, And please put your phones on vibrate and take any calls outside of the room. Thank you. And with that,
My name is Joe Comer, Chairman of the Board. I'd like to introduce you to the Board. To my immediate right is Commissioner Wolf Van Schoen, and to the far right is Tony Pellegrino, Vice Chairman. To my immediate left is Chip Keller, and this will be the last meeting for Chip Keller. He's stepping down from the Board. And to his left is Don Provencher, Commissioner. To his left is Ron Minor, Superintendent, and then Michelle Houghton, Financial Director.
okay. At this time, we are going to be listening to some presentations. And if you want to move down,
Step down.
sit in the front row.
Away.
Yep.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Rosemarie Brung, and I'm a lead petitioner for 2 warrant articles that you'll be voting on tonight. Both have to do with filtering wells, the wells that we have in Merrimack that are still all open and operating. To give you an overview, these petition warrant articles are on the ballot because they didn't come from the Board of Commissioners, but they came through petition of 25 registered voters in Merrimack, with the school or the town, as well as with the MVD. If there's any warrant articles or things that a citizen wants to bring before the body, they can do that with a petition. Now, these articles request funding to filter water from Merrimack Village District wells 2 and 3, and the other article is to filter from wells 7 and 8. These wells are currently in operation. Filtration of MVD wells 4 and 5 is part of a settlement agreement between the Merrimack Village District and Saint-Gobain Performance Plastics. Those wells are closed due to significant contamination. So the rationale for filtration and the reason why these warrant articles are coming before you is that they contain PFAS. And PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're a class of chemicals that contain fluorine in an organic backbone of carbon. The prominent PFAS molecule that you've probably heard about and that started this whole thing in Merrimack is called PFOA. That stands for perfluorooctanoic acid. It's a synthetic chemical that's within the class of PFAS, and it's been linked to serious health defects, health effects, cancers, thyroid disease, immune deficiencies, and more. PFAS are very difficult to break down. They last a long time, and that's what they bring to their industrial application. Saint-Gobain uses PFAS, and particularly they use PFOA, to help disperse a coating onto fabric that makes it very everlasting. It doesn't break down. It's very good for outdoor purposes, radar, balloons, arena coverings. It's used for a lot of things like that. And because they persist so much in their application, they also persist a lot in nature and in the human body and animal bodies. They just don't break down. All MVD wells are contaminated with PFOA from this use and from discharge of this chemical by local industry. The amount of PFAS that would not cause adverse health effects is unknown. However, states are lowering limits to as low as 10 parts per trillion in drinking water. So the PFOA that exists in Merrimack wells is on this table. It's also found on a website at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. The latest measurement that's been reported in wells 2 and 3 is 12 and 25 parts per trillion. Wells 7 and 8, it's at 19 and 16 parts per trillion. And you can see how it pretty much hovers around that 20 parts per trillion. The readings will be higher in the summer because there's more groundwater that's being pulled up because of water usage. Now, the standards for PFOA, what the government has set is EPA, they don't have a enforceable limit for PFOA. They have a limit, it's 70 parts per trillion, but it's a health advisory, so it's not enforceable. But science is showing that this limit is way too high, that we need to be stricter in the amount of PFOA that's allowed in water. So New Hampshire is going through a process now of setting what's called a maximum contaminant level, or MCL, and they're proposing 38 parts per trillion. But as recent as a few weeks ago, they issued a release that they are now looking at lowering this even further because of a health study that was released from Minnesota that shows extreme risk to breastfed infants. So I expect, in my opinion, I expect that 38 is going to drop. New Jersey has a limit of 14 parts per trillion. Vermont is at 20, but that's a combined limit with PFOA and another similar compound called PFOS. New York is at 10, that's their proposed MCL, and Minnesota is at 35. But the study I referred to about the infants, Minnesota is using that to justify going lower. So the limits for PFAS are lowering all the time as more and more science is coming out about the risks that they pose to the health and the environment. So the reason that I come before you tonight and that people signed the petition is that we want to get clean water sooner than later. We don't want to wait for the government to respond. We don't want to wait for these MCLs to get established because we know that there is a health risk. And so the sooner that we can as a community clean up the water, the safer that our residents and our children will be. So the filtration that's being proposed for for all those wells that are online is called GAC. GAC stands for granulated activated carbon. It's a very efficient filter for organic contaminants. And not only will it filter PFOA, but it will filter other PFAS molecules. It will also filter other organic contaminants like dioxins or hormones or anything else that might find its way into our groundwater. And the advantage of having this filtration done by the village district is that it's filtering at the source. As the water is being pumped from the groundwater, it will travel through this system, through this plant, so to speak, that is providing this filtration. And MVD will have it monitored, and they'll be maintaining it. So it's not as though we have the responsibility of doing something at our homes to assume the cost and the knowledge to be able to maintain a home-type filtration, although would be compatible with home filtration. We expect that the limits would be near the lowest detectable limit, which would be at or lower than 2 parts per trillion. And it also would provide some extended lifespan for any home filtration system. So the 2 articles, let me go into some of the details about those. And Mike Metcalf from Underwood, who's the consulting engineer on this project, can speak further after my presentation to go into a lot of the details. But Article 2 is requesting $3.6 million for the primary purpose of designing and constructing a water filtration system for wells 7 and 8 to filter PFAS, but knowing that it'll filter other stuff too. Money would be bonded, likely over 20 years, utilizing the state revolving fund. So the advantage of having MVD having access to that is they will have preferential interest rates. $86,000 needs to be added to the 2019-2020 budget to cover the first year's interest payment. When this article gets moved to the floor after the presentations are over, I'll be immediately amending Article 2, because right now it just says the specified money. I'm going to be replacing that language with $86,000. I didn't have that figure when the petition warrant articles were first drafted. But $86,000 is the first year's interest payment, and that would be included in next year's budget. Now, this money that would be bonded, it certainly does not preclude the MVD from pursuing restitution from polluters. It's just more difficult now because New Hampshire doesn't have an MCL to go after the polluters to pay for this. But I fully anticipate as that MCL gets established and when it shows that our other wells are above that, we can definitely seek restitution. Article 3 is very similar but in its intent, but you'll see that the dollar amount is much greater. It's $10.9 million. And that reason is that those wells have to be pre-treated for iron and manganese first before the water can go into the granulated activated carbon filter. So that added money is to build this pre-treatment for iron and manganese. Money, again, would be bonded, likely over 20 years. And you'll also see the amendment for that article would come right after the article is moved to be adding $260,388 to cover the first year's interest. And again, this does not preclude MVD from going after to get reimbursement for these expenses. It's just, I don't think we should wait to get clean water. So let me go over the cost impact. I'm just speaking for these two articles. Currently, the average residential water bill is $315 a year. If Article 2 passes, that's the $10.9 million. I'm sorry, that's the $3.6 million. That will add $49 to the water bill. If Article 3 passes, it will add $112 for a total of $476. So the average water bill for these two articles, the impact would be 51%, going from $315 to $476. Now, I want to compare this to other rates from other water utilities. So Merrimack Village District, our current rate is $1.95 for 100 cubic feet of water. If these article passes, that rate goes to $2.94. Currently, Pennachuck Water Works charges $3.30 per 100 cubic feet of water. Manchester Water Works is $1.51. An Aquarian Water Company, which services, I think, Hampton, Rye, and maybe Northampton, there's 3 communities on the seacoast, they charge $4.54. So it kind of just shows you where we would fall if these articles pass. So we would still be very competitive. And these figures were reached from the Merrimack Village District rates study, which Mike Metcalf from Underwood will talk more about that later. And as I said before, it excludes other non-PFAS treatment rate increases, which would be specifically the budget and any other warrant articles that are on the ballot. So to wrap up, the personal benefits of these articles would be the security in knowing that our water, when you turn on that tap, it's filtered. It's filtered water. It's clean, it's safe, and we don't have the worry that we're drinking or especially giving our children or our grandchildren water that could be causing a health impact. And it will be filtering other contaminants as well that may be present. We don't have to pay for bottled water. It's coming out of the tap. We don't have to purchase, monitor, and maintain home treatment systems to lower PFOA. It's already been done for us at the point of service. And it should increase our home values by having filtered water at the tap. I think that's a real valid add. People don't have to, the annual cost of switching out their filters or having their system maintained, or the hundreds of dollars people end up paying by purchasing bottled water every week or every year. So that's all I have. I don't know if Brian wants to accept questions now or after the articles get moved.
You can accept questions if you want.
Oh, okay. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to come up here. Should they come up to the mic?
Yep.
Yeah. Come up to the mic.
My When you come up and speak, please hold up your voter card and state your name and address.
Sure, which one's?
Close enough. Thank you.
Gary Smith, 95 Bean Road. Mrs. Rung, would it be possible to bring up the first graphic you put up? Before I say anything, I would like to say that I'm all in favor, personally, for the water treatment. I have a feeling that it would improve the water in other ways other than the PFOAs. But my question here is, on well 7 and 8, there seems to be a downward trend from 20 to what, the latest number? Yes, but it was higher in 17 than it is in 18. And there also seems to be a declining trend across the board with the exception of well 3. So do you have an explanation for that? And does that mean that regardless of what we do, is this going to abate itself, or is this something I'm just not seeing?
Kind of handy. I'm thinking that the variation in the test is probably around 1 or 2 parts per trillion. So that's probably the variability that you'll see there. Yeah, they're all parts per trillion. So generally you'll see an increase during the summer months because more water's being pulled. But I think it's important to know how this got into our water in the first place. What happened is, in Saint-Gobain's manufacturing process, they have air vents, and then No, that's okay.
This is a problem that is in existence right now. Any protocols in play that prevent further contamination from Saint-Gobain, I think that should be addressed right away. If they're still putting stuff out.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry. My question is Saint-Gobain still operating under a condition that allows them to continue to pollute? So even if we address the wells, is there going to be more contaminants coming in via whatever vector they're using? So have they stopped releasing these things?
To answer your question, the manufacturers and the government came to a voluntary agreement several years ago to stop the manufacture of PFOA. I'm only reporting PFOA numbers, but they have replaced PFOA with other PFAS chemicals. So there's one that they're employing now that we've seen called Gen X. So what they're actually doing is just changing the molecule a little bit, or using a molecule with a little bit of a different structure so that it still imparts the properties that they want, but it doesn't fall under, it's not PFOA. It might be a difference of a carbon or two. And so there has been a lot of movement nationally to regulate PFAS as a class. So when manufacturers do that, all of those PFAS chemicals are regulated as a group, not just one or the other. Because if we regulate PFOA, they're going to come and use Gen X, and they'll use another one. So it's like whack-a-mole. You regulate one, and then you have to go and regulate another. So there is talk about regulating it as a class. I only reported the PFOA figures because it doesn't include PFOS, which has also been used, because you get into the weeds too much, and it gets a little bit too much detail for people to understand. But I would expect, and the engineers can probably talk more to this, that these numbers will grow because the soil around Saint-Gobain that drains into the groundwater has very, very high levels of PFOA. It's in, I don't know, you guys might know it, I think it's well over 58,000. So that's going to go down. There's no barrier preventing it from going into the groundwater, and groundwater travels, it moves. So it's all of that PFOA that's sitting on the soil is just going to go down into the groundwater. Did that answer your question?
Well, I guess my next question is a two-parter. Is Saint-Gobain the only person that's, entity that's emitting these things, and if it is the only thing, is having Saint-Gobain in town worth the tax base to keep them in town, and are enough people being employed there? I mean, there has to be some logic that says you can't continue to do this, and I know they have a history in Europe of doing the same thing.
Okay, yeah, I don't think I want to answer those questions because they're sort of outside the scope, even though they're very good questions. But to get to your earlier comment, Gary, there are other industries in the Amherst area that are impacting wells 2 and 3. It's called, I think, Witches Brook. And there's been, it's 7 and 8, that have shown some contamination that may not be, it may be from other industries in the Amherst area. But really the scope of these are all great questions, but the scope of these warrant articles is just to get our water cleaned up. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. Oh.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Dick Barry. I live at 12 Kyle Road. And you're the right person for me to ask this question of, since you were on the school board for several years. And the school board has recently gone through implementing a filtration system. And so I'm assuming that you have similar numbers that looked at what was the contamination before they put the filters in, and what is it now?
Dick, I don't have those numbers. There might be somebody from the school board that can give them. The filtration system they put in is granulated activated carbon, so I would expect that it would be able to filter down to a non-detector, that less than 2 parts per trillion level. The other thing why that was such an urgent issue for the school board is that PFAS contamination is particularly hazardous to children. Just they're smaller and they can consume a quart of water and have the impact be double, triple an adult-sized person. So it was more urgent for the school board to address contamination since children are drinking that water. But I don't know the actual measurements of the PFAS before and after filtration.
Thank you. Since you went further in your comments, we agree it is important for the children, but we also agree that we ought to know if it worked. They spent money on it. They should have tested it beforehand and afterhand. So somewhere there should be the numbers. I'm surprised you haven't got them.
I have, but their system is different than this system on scale. But I don't want to speak to it because we have the engineers who've actually designed the system here, and they have the results of what the effectiveness of this designed system would be. Because if they want to answer. Right. Right. Oh, Shannon's here. Yeah, Shannon, has it been, yeah. Go.
Please come up.
You have before and after numbers?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Barry. Shannon Barnes, 55 Lawrence Road, and happen to also be chair of the school board. So we did put infiltration, and it was running in the teens. We do have those records in our minutes, and they were posted on our website. So the historical testing is posted at sau26.org. And once filtration went in, they did go to non-detect. So thank you for your question.
Next, we have a presentation on the PFAS evaluation of wells 2, 3, 7, and 8 by Mike Metcalf. Can everyone see the projector with the lights on, or should we turn the lights off? Turn them down?
All right, can everybody hear me? I'm Mike Metcalf with Underwood Engineers. I'm going to talk a little bit about the evaluation and the study that we did, which led to the numbers that Rosemary was presenting. So, let's see, I got to advance this, right? So the commissioners came to us and said that, they wanted us to look at treating all of the wells, not just, so wells 4 and 5 right now are offline, and a treatment design just went into DES for final review on that. So that's been underway, but they also asked us to look at what would it take to treat the other wells that are below the standards and remove PFAS from them. So our charge was how could that be done and what would it cost? So just talking a little bit about the wells. So well 2 is rated for 1,500 gallons per minute. The pump is only 1,100 gallons per minute. That's how much they run it at. Well 3 is 800 gallons a minute. And wells 7 and 8, which have an existing iron and manganese water treatment plant, have a combined capacity of 1,250 gallons per minute. And as I said, wells 4 and 5, which are currently offline, have a capacity of about 625 gallons a minute. That means about 15% of the total capacity of MVD has been taken offline until those are treated and put back online. You heard a little about the standards. I won't go on this too long. Right now, what New Hampshire has is they have an ambient groundwater quality standard of 70 parts per trillion for PFOA or PFOS, or the combination of PFOA and PFOS. And in New Hampshire, an ambient groundwater quality standard has the same force as an MCL. So once that AGQS was set at 70 and wells 4 and 5 were above it, the MVD was told to take those offline until they could correct that. Excuse me? Closer? Oh yeah, I can hear myself. Try to see this. So the current levels in 2, 3, 7, and 8, you saw some of the PFOA levels that Rosemary had up there. They're all less than 70 parts per trillion. And I just I went through the whole database that's on the DES website. And if you look at it, there's about a range of a minimum of 5 combined PFOA and PFOS to a maximum of 52. But as you saw, there was a lot of numbers in the teens and 20s, or, that's about where it is. There are pending standards, and Rosemary mentioned those. They're looking at a possible PFOA standard of 38 parts per trillion, and as you heard, that may go lower. In terms of the where do the existing wells stand, I've got the next slide I'll show you, we'll say where we are in relation to that 38. And then the other 2 contaminants, PFHXS, which is perfluorohexanoic acid, and PFNA, which is perfluorononanonic acid. So one is a 6-chain and one is a 9-chain, and the other ones we've been talking about are 8 carbon chains. Those are also have proposed standards of respectively 80 and 23 parts per trillion. I've looked at all the data for the MVD wells, and for those contaminants, you are very, very either below detection or right at detection. So those do not appear to be an issue in MVD. So this shows the PFOA concentration, and this addresses the question that the gentleman just asked. So you can see that at the beginning there was a lot of variability, and some of that variability we think has to do with these are new contaminants. The standard for testing this was pretty much a new standard, and there was a lot of variation, and you can see that it starts to level off as we go down, but we're not seeing a decline. It's really sort of holding steady. I don't see a definite trend from that data. So our approach in doing this evaluation was that all PFAS compounds were to be treated to non-detect. Initially, when EPA was starting to test, they were looking at 24 compounds, and after a number of tests, really only 14 were showing up. So MVD has been monitoring those 14 compounds for the last several years. Those were the 14 compounds that we sent to treatment manufacturers to get their recommendations on their media, their equipment, and pricing. The other part of the approach that we looked at, and this was in concert and working with the commissioners, was since this is not a regulatory requirement to remove this, when you're talking regulatory, you would have a lead and a lag vessel, so that when the lead vessel got essentially filled up with the contaminant and it started to bleed through, which you would test before it gets to the next vessel, you can take that one offline, switch the lag to become the lead vessel, and then you could change the carbon out in that lead vessel, which would become the lag vessel. So you always have, a new treatment vessel online. That's not as critical when there's not a regulatory need to do it, so that if you're taking it down to below detection and you start to get some bleed through, you can either take that offline or, you can get it changed, and like I say, we're not violating any standard. So the reason for doing that was to try and do this in the most economical manner. But what we've done, and as I'll show some slides of this, is leave room for an additional lag vessel, be it GAC or resin, which is also a possible treatment technique, which I'll get into. These were the treatment alternatives that we looked at. GAC, you've heard, that's granular activated carbon. Ion exchange resins. There have been several resins that have been developed that are selective for PFAS, and I expect there will be more because this is an emerging market, and I'm sure other people are going to get in on it. Other processes we thought about, advanced oxidation, which has to do with using a strong oxidant like ozone in the presence of hydrogen peroxide. Wasn't really effective at removing PFAS and PFOA. Reverse osmosis removes everything, but it's very expensive, and it has a high reject, which means a high waste value is created. And zeolite is another mineral material that's being looked at. It may have some promise, but it's really still in development phases, and there's no full-scale operations at this point. So we concentrated on granular activated carbon and the ion exchange resins. So in terms of the GAC, we know that it's, and you've heard, it's got demonstrated, removal capabilities for PFO and PFOA and PFOS. Reportedly less effective in some of the shorter chains, so that those might tend to break through faster than the longer chain compounds. And as Rosemary said, GAC, we've been referring to it as a filter, and it's actually not a filter, it's an adsorbent. And I know that's a hard description but if it was a filter, it would start to fill up with stuff and you'd have to backwash it, and you don't backwash GAC filters. Eventually all the adsorption sites get used up and you need to change that for new media that has more adsorption sites. But it will, things like manganese, iron, especially organics, any total organic carbon in the water will use the adsorption sites and reduce the life of the GAC for removing PFOA. Based on the water quality, we expect, or the manufacturers we've been talking to, expect to get 1 to 2 years before you have to change that GAC media. And the GAC media, we found, is less expensive than resin. The trade-off is that resin you don't need as much resin. It has the ability to treat it faster, so you don't have as much and you have smaller vessels, and the costs begin to come, competitive. So these are what GAC filters look like. The one on the left is from peas. You've probably heard about the contamination over on peas. That's primarily PFOS. Those are 10-foot diameter GAC tanks. They each have 20,000 pounds of carbon. The picture to the right is from Hoosick Falls, New York. Those are also GAC vessels, also from the same manufacturer, Calgon Corporation. They have 40,000 pounds of GAC in each one of those filters. And that's what we're talking about putting in at wells 4 and 5, and as you'll see, the treatment units that would also go in 7 and 8 and 2 and 3. Just touching briefly on resin, because resin is the other sort of promising treatment technique, and it's actually going to be used as the lead treatment at the peas plant, followed by GAC. It removes it faster, so you don't have to have as much contact time with it, which means you can have it smaller. But one of the issues with resin is that it can't take chlorinated water. And you'll see that's an issue for us in where we need to treat, because the water that would be going on to those adsorbers is going to have chlorine in it. So wells 7 and 8. So that system, as I said, there's an existing iron and manganese treatment facility there. That's using green sand filtration. It's called Green Sand Plus. You feed an oxidant, which is chlorine, that oxidizes the iron and manganese, and they're filtered out in those filters. So as a result, the water that's coming off of those iron and manganese filters has chlorine in it. If we were going to use resin, we would have had to dechlorinate, adding another treatment step before that. So really, GAC was more appropriate here. Also, resin requires bag filters ahead of it, 5-micron bag filters, and you don't need that with GAC. So we're looking at two 12-foot diameter, 26-foot tall GAC units after the iron and manganese treatment. We would have a 34 by 48-foot building addition, and this is the probable cost is $3.6 million, as you've heard. This is the iron and manganese plant. Well 7, there's 4 of those filters with Green Sand Plus media, and you're looking at all the face piping. That is the treatment plant building from the front, and that is the back, and that is where the addition would go on to that part of the building. So you just imagine something being built out towards us from there, and then this is a plan view that shows the treatment plant with the 4 green sand filters, the chemical feed areas, and other parts of the existing plant, and that shaded area is where it would be added onto. We're limited in size to that area because when we did well 7 and 8, there was a fine sand underlying that site that could liquefy in a earthquake. So we had to densify the soil by driving in things called rammed aggregate piers. And imagine a big wire cage of stone about this big around that you drive into the ground every 3 feet. That's been done in order to densify that soil. So that area where that shaded is prepared and ready for that. It was there for expanded iron and manganese treatment if we brought on another well, but now we're going to be using it for PFAS if this goes ahead. That's a section of what it would look like. Those filters are tall, and it may be... So the floor of the treatment plant right now is right where that red line is right there, and down here, there are, of the existing plant, there are tanks below this level. The addition would be built right here so that we could build these tall tanks and not have to raise the roof of the existing building quite as high, because otherwise you would have to raise it up significantly higher, and the walls that were built for the existing plant weren't designed to be that high. So therefore, we would depress this part of the building, and this is where you would be walking in. So there'd have to be some sort of scaffolding, or catwalk up there. All right, so moving to wells 2 and 3. So well 3, it was already in the CIP for MVD to have an iron and manganese removal plant because the iron and manganese levels in well 3 are significantly above the MCLs. When they put that well on, I believe people know about it. And then well 2 is probably, the highest quality, one of the highest producing, best wells that MVD has. So when we look at PFAS treatment we looked at the alternative of iron and manganese and PFAS treatment for well 3, just PFAS for well 2, or since they are reasonably close to each other, a combined plant where you'd run water main from each to a common location, which happens to be MVD land, where the maintenance garage and facilities are, and we would build something there. So trying to look at how can we do this as economically as possible. So what would be involved would be an 800 gallon per minute green sand filtration to treat well 3. And then 2,300 gallon per minute GAC to treat the total potential of 1,500 gallons a minute from well 2 and the 800 gallons a minute from well 3. The new water mains would have to come from each well to the treatment plant. There would be 3 12-foot diameter GAC treatment units here. And as I showed with the other one, we would also have room to add a lag vessel or a resin vessel after that in the future should we need the lead lag or let's say additional treatment for new compounds that come along, as Rosemary mentioned. The opinion of cost for that is the $10.9 million. And that's what that treatment plant would look like. That would be the iron and manganese treatment part, and these would be the 3 GAC filters, and this would be room for 3, well, I think they're laid out sort of funny, but anyways, there'd be three now and room for 3 later. And that's just a sectional view again, showing, you know, the tall tanks. The iron and manganese would be a horizontal tank, and but they make them both horizontal and vertical, and we were looking at a vertical one. And then underneath there would be clear well storage, where treated water would be stored, as well as recycle water, because you have to backwash the iron and manganese filters. Just quickly, one way you test GAC is to do something called a rapid scale small column test, and we're doing that on wells 4 and 5 right now with well 4 and 5 water. Actually, we've kind of wrapped that up, and they are, we did a bench scale test on 3 different types of carbon, and what they do is they simulate with a small column feeding this for a long period of time, and through this simulation, they are getting, you know, this is the number of bed volumes of water that's going through these treatment units. So we're up to what, between, you know, depending on the media, 93 to 116,000 bed volumes, which is equivalent to about 1.8 to 2.2 years before we would need to change out the GAC media. Recognize this is with wells 4 and 5, which have higher levels. So if we had the same test with the other wells, presumably it would last longer, would be the expectation. Opinion of cost, we've heard. Capital cost, $3.6 million. We're projecting an O&M cost of $192,500. And then for wells 2 and 3, capital of $10.9 million and an O&M cost of, I can't read it, $382,500 per year. Oh, I'm sorry, and O&M is operation and maintenance. So that's the cost of operating it, to have somebody there to pay for the power, the pumping, the heat, the lights, and the maintenance, to go in and keep the place running and clean and maintain. So if this is passed, the next step will be to move to really we would call this a conceptual design at this point, you know, and really to cost things out and see how well it's going to work. You know, you get into preliminary and final design. That would be the next step. And a rough schedule, you know, design is probably about a year process. Once you go through preliminary design, make sure everybody agrees, and move to final design. Piloting would take about 3 months. Construction anywhere from, from a year and a half to 2 years. So they'll be online in around 2022 if this gets passed. And that takes you to the end of my part of the presentation. If there's any questions, I don't know if you want to do questions now.
Good evening. Thank you for the presentation. Bill Boyd, 139 Joppa Road. Can you go back to slide 29 for me, please? Or 28? Yeah, 28, please. 28, please. So that's, I'm sorry, 27. I apologize. I should have said Carlton Fisk. I apologize. Okay. So for wells 7 and 8, 2 and 3, the operation maintenance budget altogether in the aggregate is roughly $600,000, correct?
Say that again,
The operation and maintenance budget altogether for
for both of them.
for both of them.
Yeah.
Does that include the cost of the filter as well?
No.
So what is the cost of the filter to replace every year?
So that, that does include the cost of the media change out. So that cost includes what we have estimated for pumping costs, for chemical costs, and for the GAC change out based on that frequency of changing it once a year. So based on the volume you have to bring in and the price that we are getting from the GAC manufacturers of what it costs to replace that carbon.
And I know this is being redundant, but to confirm, these costs are independent from the agreement that you've made with wells 4 and 5 that are also going to have a similar like system that's being proposed for 2, 3, 7, and 8, correct?
That is correct. These costs have nothing to do with the cost for wells 4 and 5 or the settlement agreement.
And with that being said, do you know what the costs are for wells 4 and 5 on an annual basis? Operations and maintenance.
106,000? I believe the estimated cost for the well 4 and 5 operation and maintenance was around 106,000 per year.
And Saint-Gobain's going to carry that for how long?
Right now, the agreement is 5 years, or as long as that money lasts, in case we are low on what it costs, less if we are low on what it costs. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
See, nope. Move on to the next. Nope, one more. Okay.
Jesse Hensley, 30 Whittier. This might have been answered at a previous town meeting, but if it's been proven that St. Gobain were the ones that polluted the wells, then how come, or what's preventing legal action to get them to pay for the whole thing?
That's a question that, as a technical consultant, I can't answer.
So my name is Wolf. I'm one of the commissioners. The way we've been presented the situation is that for any contaminations on these wells that is lower than the current legal limit of New Hampshire, which is 70 parts per trillion, there is no damage. So since there's no damage, there's no way to go after polluter. Simple as that. So as long as the levels are what they are, there's nothing for us to do. We cannot go after any polluters, be it St. Gobain or somebody else. Once the levels might get lowered, the situation changes, and we have the ability to go after the polluters, even if we invest now. That is the current situation.
Next presentation. Okay. If you are sitting in the bleachers or you see an empty seat next to you, could you kind of squeeze together a little bit? We have some people that might want to sit down. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The next presentation will be given. Oh, sorry. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right. My first question is...
Please, your name.
Oh, Louise Kutavas. I'm on Davidson Avenue.
Thank you.
My first question is, what do you do with the expired use filtered materials, and does the cost include disposal? As I've seen in other industries, disposal can be a big cost.
So part of the cost, the O&M cost up there is change out of the carbon, and they come and they take the carbon away and they thermally destruct it. So MVD is not, once they come, they take the old carbon, they put it into one truck, and another truck, they load in the new carbon, and then they drive away with the old one to their incineration facility.
My other question has to do with water quality as far as taste. Merrimack has always had excellent tasting water. Does any of this affect the taste, or does it improve it? That's it.
I really don't know. I would expect it would still taste good, and but it's kind of a subjective thing, and especially if, for instance, if you had a chlorine taste that you didn't have before, you might not like that. But the water is chlorinated now, so I really don't know.
Good evening, Brian Stisser, 56 Middlesex Road. So, noticing that on this slide, the cost projections for O&M are based on 1-year medium life. You said the bench testing for 4 and 5, that's about 3 times the level of contamination, is showing 18 to 22 months. So presumably the filter material is going to last at least double that amount of time. How much of that O&M projection is medium change out versus the other O&M costs? Thank you.
That's a good question that I don't have right here. I see Keith reaching for the report, so maybe we can get you that information. I mean, we have it, I just don't know it off the top of my head, how much is change out and how much isn't. He raises a good point in that, and when we did this, the evaluation at first, we were using a 2-year life for GAC, And a lot of the resin was coming into the year and a half, and they were crying foul because resin generally lasts longer than GAC. And we had varying reports. Some manufacturers said 1 year, some said 2 years. We erred on the conservative side of 1 year as trying to make sure we're giving you the higher possible cost.
Okay. The next presentation will be by Keith Pratt on the rate study that was done.
Okay, thank you. My name is Keith Pratt, and I'm president of Underwood Engineers, and I've been helping the district along with this project as well. And I'm going to focus just quickly on the financial impact and what we estimate how the rates will be impacted if these articles pass. Underwood has consistently been doing rate work, and we had last time we did a rate model was 2006. Every 2 years, we try to update that. We were doing an update in 2016 and 2017 when a lot of this came to be, so we put things a little bit on hold to try to get our hands around what may happen so that we could be looking at rates properly. So we've done that now, and we've incorporated how these articles, if passed, would impact. So we recently issued a rate model that was, I think it's actually available on the website as well, in late 2018. We looked at 4 scenarios in the rates, so I'll show you how these things will sort of cumulatively impact the users. First thing we wanted to do was make sure that we didn't lose sight of our existing budget, our existing capital program, and the needs just to support projects that you're doing, that are being done currently. We've also then looked at the 3 scenarios for PFAS treatment, 7 and 8, what iron and manganese, as Mike pointed out, there is an iron and manganese that was already on your capital plan. That's now being incorporated in the second article. And then PFAS treatment of wells 2 and 3 as well. So this is kind of how it breaks down. You're going to see 3 rate impacts as I go through this. The first one is what we are sort of estimating on the existing users, the existing budget and the existing, if none of the PFAS treatment plant work is passed, there's going to be some rate adjustments. Those are going to occur no matter what. We're still working on those a little bit. But what we do have most importantly as you debate these 2 articles is what we see the impacts for treatment at 7 and 8 and then treatments at 2 and 3. The first thing is what we see is sort of a baseline increase. We're still working on this. This will be a function of consumption and actual expenditures. We think that to support your existing budget, and your proposed budgets, some debt that's coming on board. Turkey Hill Road Booster Station is just being designed, and that will be going out to bid as well. So there are projects that are happening. So there are going to be some rate adjustments anyway. We think it's going to be probably, this was the first estimate that we came back with in late fall. We're still working on these things. These might change a little bit, but it gives you an idea that there will be some sort of rate increase. Right now we're projecting at 28%. That could be a little bit more depending on consumption or the actual budget and expenditures, but just to give you an idea that will be happening. If the first article passes, the 3.6 million, we are projecting an additional 12% rate increase. That includes the debt service, and that includes the operation and maintenance that Mike just spoke to. So when you look at all 3, the existing rate impacts plus Article 3, you might see in the range of 43%. If the second article passes, the 10.9 million, and the first article passes, we see a combined rate increase of about 40%. So we see some 2 baseline rate increases, and then we see a 40% rate increase that would cover the debt service and the operation and maintenance. So overall, between what we need to do for the existing budget, the existing capital plan, the existing projects, and the debt service to support them, plus if both articles pass, we're seeing in the neighborhood of 80%. As somebody noted, if the GAC life is a little bit longer than we thought, cost may come down a little bit. But I think these are designed to give you some ballpark as to how that would impact. This is a table that shows the added value or added budget. It is significant, as you saw in some of those numbers between the debt service. So often the right-hand column sort of shows the added O&M and debt service costs if the two articles do pass. I think it's better represented here graphically. This is a chart of your existing debt service in green, and then if these articles do pass, what we see is on the top right, or on the right-hand side, how much additional debt service would be added. So it is, they are significant projects to you. This slide probably gives you the best. Was there a laser? Got it. An existing user right now in Merrimack, if using an average consumption of about 200 or just over 200 gallons a day, we calculate your bill to be about $315. Somebody uses less water, it's less. Somebody who uses more water, it's more. We see about that going up for the average user about $87 just to support current budget, current debt, and proposed debt that's not PFAS related. If the $3.6 million petition warrant article passes, we see another increase of about $49. That includes the debt service and the operation and maintenance, as we've projected in the slideshow. If the $10.9 million warrant article passes, and if both of them pass, it's up 112. So if the budget, both articles pass, we see the average bill going up to about $563. That's about a 79% increase. Plus or minus, it might be a little bit more. With offsetting things, it could be a little bit less, but it gives you an idea of where this thing would fall. We are noting that the average user in the state of New Hampshire using the same water has a bill of about $577. So if all these things pass, and we're pretty close in the estimates, we're seeing that Merrimack's average bill would be about at state average. Right now, your rates are significantly lower than the state average, so you do have that advantage. I will also note, though, that smaller users would see smaller hits. This is an average residential user. Commercial users, industrial users would see a significant increase in their bill. We didn't calculate all those out. They are in the rate model. But I think most of the people are interested in the average increase, and that's what this is. So that's a summary of the rate impact. So I think between the two, if there's any other questions, we can field them.
Someone coming up.
Hi, Barb Amaral, 1 Spruce Street. Is there a benefit to passing one question and not the other? If there's still wells that are contaminated, then isn't that water still going to get into, if it's all combined?
I think that's just going to be a personal choice. I mean, as we've noted, wells 4 and 5 are being treated because they exceed the standards today. What you're voting on, they do not exceed the standards as they stand today, or as you know. So if you don't pass one and do pass the other, there will still be PFAS at detectable levels in your water.
Ryan Stisser, 56 Middlesex Road. So on the rate increase table that you just showed, were those numbers, for clarification, marginal or cumulative in terms of the increase if the warrant articles pass?
Yep, good question. Just to clarify, those are cumulative. So if everything passes and the assumptions that were made in the rate models hold true, the average user would see a total increase of $112.
So the difference between passing both warrant articles and passing neither warrant article is about a $25 per year increase for an average user, correct? Sorry.
sure I said that right. So the cumulative part is the $563. So your current bill is $315. If okay. Over on the right-hand side, just for clarification, is the associated increase to the article that passes, or doesn't?
You asked the question on the O&M costs, and the large majority is about 90% of the O&M cost is that GAC change out. So, just rough figures, only about 10%. And it should also be stated those are additional O&M costs over and above the cost of already operating those wells. Okay.
And the commissioners just reminded me, too, that the $577, that's the average rate that we're quoting there, is today's New Hampshire average rate. And there is a dashboard on the state website. You can follow it. You can track it. It actually changes quite frequently because people update their data. So presumably, as these rate increases hit you, that $577 is also going to be going up every year as well.
Need my card again? Thank you. Thank you very much. Really, really good presentation. Appreciated it. It did raise two questions for me. The GAC, when you change it out, will be hyper-soaked with PFOAs, and I thought he said it was going to be taken away to get incinerated. So that means that they'll be putting more PFAS in the air wherever they incinerate it. Is that correct?
I'm afraid I don't know, but my guess, so I can't say this definitively because I've never seen one of these destruction facilities, but I'm fairly certain that that is somehow being contained and that it's not just being spewed back out to the atmosphere. But I could follow up on that and ask one of the manufacturers. But it's a good question.
Oh, let me just ask the question, will we have a hold harmless clause when they take that away so that if something happens, we don't get penalized for it? I don't know that, but it's a good idea, to do something like that. It's not, right now, it's not built into our specifications or something that follows the path of the material after it's taken away from MVD. But it's a good thing to look into and see whether there's any ongoing liability. One more. Thank you. And this one is more of a financial question and procedural. We saw that you looked at 4 different methods. There's another method that, based on what Rosemary Rung presented, we ought to be looking at. Manchester, their current rate cubic feet is lower than ours, and they already have a pipeline extension down Back River Road. Did anybody look at tying into their system?
I think the best way to answer that is back in, correct me on the date, but 6 or 8 years ago, even before the PFAS issue came up, Merrimack did task us with looking not only at connecting to Manchester potentially, but to Pennachuck. And we were finding at those times that it was higher cost. It has not been looked at, since. I think it would require whether or not Manchester has the supply or has the capacity even available. But prior looks did show that it was higher cost. Yeah, there was a large capital investment. Not only all you saw in the presentation here was the operation costs. There is a large capital investment to purchase the rights to Manchester Water with the system development charge.
Well, Tim's coming up. Why don't the commissioners come up to the table here? Move things along.
So Tim Tenhay, 5 Windy Hollow Circle. I've got a financial question, and I'm looking at pages 30 and 31 in our district annual report. When you look at the annual report, it says for fiscal year ending June 30, 2018, there were total revenues of $3.5 million and total expenses of $3 million for an operating gain of $521,000, or roughly $500,000. On the surface, that looks like we're actually operating in a profit for the MVD, where we're bringing in more dollars than we're expending. So going back to the rate study, did the rate study intend to keep that sort of performance going forward? Or are we going to nudge away at that and bring that back down to a level that is more even, you might say, operating at a net gain of 0? And take that a little bit further, on page 31, it speaks to the fact that the district has $2 million available to it in cash, which is half the operating budget. So
Tim, your question is specific to the budget?
No, it goes back to the rate study that was just presented.
Okay.
The rate study made
Okay.
assumptions that with the current budget, the rates were going up 13%.
Okay.
If we were assuming that we were going to maintain these levels of surpluses, is that factored in? Or if we decided to chew those away and chew them down a little bit, would we in fact have a lower rate schedule here, and therefore a lower impact with the numbers you see up here? So.
It's a good question, and I can just clarify a little bit too. On the rate study, going forward, we are projecting the rate impacts based on essentially a no surplus, and I think there's been a little change in how we're monitoring it or doing it. In the past, there was a surplus, and the surplus no, it doesn't exist any longer. So now to establish capital reserve in inputs, we are budgeting that as part of it. So there is a $500,000 that is specifically set aside that we are talking about setting rates to support. That's specifically for capital reserves. So the answer is the rate projections going forward are not carrying a surplus.
So just for clarity then, did we, in the current budget, decide to expend that surplus of $2 million, and therefore the current budget or the expenses is in the area of $5 million this year? I mean, I guess the question is where did the surplus go? And
the surplus is what is part of our fund balance, and the fund balance is maintained in light of a potential situation happening where we would need to cover operating costs. So we usually do try to maintain about 6 months' worth of operating costs, which this year we're going for a $3.8 million budget, so that would be $1.9 million. And from our FY18 final audit, the cash number actually has come down under the $2 million. So we would be wanting to see it about the 1.9 based on the 3.8 million, and if we add these additional treatment facilities and the associated costs, we would also have a greater budget and need to maintain our fund balance at a higher level.
Thank you. Okay. Now we're going to start with Article 2. Shall the Merrimack Village District vote to raise and appropriate a sum of $3,600,000 for the primary purpose of designing and constructing a water treatment system for MVD wells 7 and 8 to reduce per and polyfluorocarbon substances PFAS, such sum to be raised by the issuance of bonds or notices not to exceed $3,600,000 under and in compliance with the provisions of the Municipal Financial Act, and to authorize the Board of Commissioners to issue and negotiate such bonds or notes, and shall be in the best interests of the MVD, to additionally participate in the state revolving fund established for this purpose, and or participate in the existing or future economic funding, and to allow the Board of Commissioners to expend such monies as to become available, and to authorize the Board of Commissioners to take any other action or to pass any other vote relative to said purpose, and to raise and appropriate the required sum of money for the purpose of 2019-2020 interest on said bond or notes. 2/3 ballot vote required. Moved, seconded? Seconded. Would you like to speak?
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to amend Article 2 by replacing the words "the required sum of money" with the specific dollar amount of $86,000.
Thank you. Do I have a second on that amendment? Someone say their name. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, this is a housekeeping item required by the New Hampshire Department of Revenue Administration as, quote, "there must always be a some certain amount when raising and appropriating." This amount, $86,000, is the interest on a $3.6 million bond at 4% interest for a 20-year term, which is the reasonable expectation should Article 2 pass.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this amendment?
Paul McCallie, 17 Mile Point Road, also the Finance Director for the Town of Merrimack. I believe SRF funding and grants and bonds is 1 year after substantial completion. So are we saying that substantial completion for wells, this article, Article 2, is going to be done within 1 year of the bond being passed? So next year at this time, we're going to have substantial completion? So then you don't need to add the $86,000 in then, because you're not going to spend it. Correct?
I can probably help and speak to that. I think, I know it was noted that the SRF is to be used, and we intend to, but as this has come up recently, district is not currently on the SRF priority list. So the funds don't exist for the district to use this. We will be pursuing not only the SRF funds, but trust funds and other sources to, if this passes, to try to keep the interest rates to the benefit of the district. I'm not speaking for the petitioners, but I think the article just allows you that if SRF or trust funds don't come through, you'd have the ability to go to the bond bank. So I think it's just, my take is taking, giving you some flexibility on your funding.
Any other questions on the amendment?
Chris Christensen, 27 Great Stone Drive. I'm looking at two things on the $86,000. I really think it's pretty likely we're going to get much better rate on the bonds, and I'll echo what Paul McCallie said, that this probably isn't going to be due the first day. However, the second part of the question is, we can pay for this now out of existing working capital and surplus. And so do we have to raise the rates immediately to cover this $86,000, or is this just an authorization to expend that and give it a line item in the budget?
Just authorization.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment, adding 86,000? Thank you. All opposed? Motion passes. I'm going back to reading the article. I'm not going to read the whole thing. We've got $86,000 in there. Is there any other further discussion on that article? Seeing none. Oh, come on up.
Hi, my name is Wendy Thomas. I live at 10 Wildcat Falls Road. I just wanted to make a comment about the cost, the increased cost in water that everybody would be paying. We live 3.5 miles from St. Gobain. In 2016, we were told we had nothing to worry about with regard to our water. We have a private well. We had our water tested. For the first time, it was 20.4 ppt. The second time, it was 49 ppt. The third time, which was 9 months after we first had it tested, it came back at 56 ppt. Testing cost for the first test was $500. The state paid for the second one, and St. Gobain paid for the third one. We were told we could not use the water from our well. We got a filtration system. That was $1,200. It cost $1,000 to install that whole house filtration system. But because we had been putting contaminated water through our pipes, we also had to get a reverse osmosis filtration system at the end point. For 6 months before we put the system in, we lived on bottled water. We have 8 adults in our house. That came to 25 gallons of water a week for 6 months, which came to a cost of about $600. Every year, we have to pay $500 to buy new filter cartridges that need to be replaced every 6 months. So far, we have spent $2,930 with an ongoing cost of at least $500 a year. This does not include repairs to the filtration system, which covers an entire wall of our basement. Reverse osmosis, we have it installed in our kitchen. It is a light trickle, and it is the only faucet from which my family can drink. We no longer have cold or hot water. We simply have water that comes on. It takes about 3 minutes to fill our coffee pot in the morning. Getting public water filtered at the rate proposed is a bargain, even at the maximum increase of $112 a year. Filtering the public water ensures that even if your water is filtered at home, you can still get a cup of coffee at a restaurant and know that it is safe and will not make you sick. Regardless of the vote tonight, smaller size makes a difference. As Rosemarie stated, PFAS affects children more, and it also affects our pets. Area vets are seeing an increase in cancer in Merrimack dogs and cats. We lost 2 small dogs, one to cancer and one at 4 years old to kidney disease, both symptoms of PFAS exposure. Please consider giving your pets and children filtered or bottled water, and please consider voting for both of these warrant articles. Thank you.
Todd Beard, 21 Cabot. Thank you, Ms. Thomas, for stealing my thunder. My numbers are not as enormous as hers, but in 2016, I installed a single-point faucet filtration system using 2 carbon filters. I began keeping the receipts in the hope that someday I'd be able to go to St. Gobain, knock on the door, and ask for my money back. So far, that hasn't happened. We're not going to worry about that. In 2016, I spent $379. In 2017, I spent $426. And in this past year, I spent $479 for filters and to replace worn-out components. But that only gave us 1 tap in the house where we could drink water. We still wash our dishes, we still wash our clothes, we still brush our teeth, we still bathe, we still water our garden, and we still swim in a swimming pool that is contaminated with PFOA water. I stand before you from the tip of my hair on my angry middle-aged guy haircut down to the socks in my boots covered in PFOAs. So if you're asking me if I'm going to spend $161 additional a year to filter all of the water that comes into my residence that my family consumes versus the ever-increasing $400 to $500 I'm going to have to spend on filters, if you're blessed with common sense, I think you can figure it out. My question to you, dear commissioners, is this. The bottom of Article 2 and Article 3, and I leave it up to the moderator whether he'll let him answer from Article 3, says that this was recommended by the Board of Commissioners by a vote of 2, 2, and 0. That means 2 of you voted for it, 2 of you voted against it. What I want to hear is from each individual how you voted and why.
Joe Comer, I voted against it for legal reasons mostly. Because the department is being sued, and it could jeopardize the case.
Chip Keller, same reason as Joe.
I'm Don Preventure, and I'm going to part with my commissioners on this one. Thanks for coming out tonight. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. And when this all started in 2016, I was skeptical. I didn't believe it. I didn't really know what PFAS was all about. But I did my homework, and I looked into it, and I reviewed reports, and I reviewed newspaper articles. And once you start looking into it and you see there's some truth into it, it's not all hype and hysteria. And there are things that are more important in this world. And looking back at all of the literature, a big turning point for me was in the summer of 2018 when the ATSDR came out with recommended limits as low as 7 and 10, and our EPA was still looking at limits of 70, and they had no intent on lowering it. That was a turning point for me. DES came out with PFOA limits of 38 in January. I'm not sure if you're aware, but on February 21st, they issued another statement that based on some recent information found in Minnesota, they were considering lowering the 38 level, quote unquote, substantially lower. Now, if substantially lower to me means at levels that our wells are currently at. And I'm not going to wait around for the regulators to catch up with this. Everything is always subject to politics. And the only way we're going to get through that is to take matters into our own hands and vote here tonight to get rid of the PFOA, because I don't know if it's safe at any level in our water.
So Wolf von Schön, I voted for the articles, and I recommended them. There's a number of reasons why. For one, I really don't know as far as the impact of these contaminants for the average person, but the data is getting clearer and clearer that for the little ones, it is a real issue at levels that are currently legal in the state of New Hampshire. And because I don't know any better, but I see trends in powerhouse states like New Jersey and Minnesota and states that have budgets for their environmental agencies that are certainly larger than ours, I felt they probably know better than we do. They certainly know better than I do. That's one reason. I fully understand why some of the commissioners voted against it, and I caution to discredit them. And the reason why is because I'm involved in litigation at work all the time. I'm a vice president of an automation company, and I know what litigation means in terms of damages and liability. Our advice is very clear on how to act as a commissioner to protect the MVD from damage. But I also have a conscience, and I don't want to look back at myself 5 or 10 or 15 years from now when everybody knows how these things go with, dioxins and nicotine, and, and we all know what it is. I don't want to look back at myself 10, 15 years from now and saying I was in a position to make a difference, and I didn't. So I don't know any better, and that's why I'm taking the safe route. If that exposes us to liability, I can live with that. If that exposes me personally as a commissioner with my oath to liability, I can live with that too. I think my wife can too. I hope so. I'll find out. And again, I voted for it because I feel it's the right thing to do.
Any other discussion on Article 2 as amended? All right, we will postpone voting on that. We'll move to Article 3. Shall the Merrimack Village District vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $10,900,000 for a primary purpose of designing and constructing a water treatment system for MVD wells 2 and 3 to reduce iron, manganese, and perpolyfluoro substances, PFAS, including new water lines connecting those wells to new treatment systems. Such sum to be raised by the issuance of serial bonds or notes not to exceed $10,900,000 under and in compliance with the provisions of the Municipal Finance Act, and to authorize the Board of Commissioners to issue and negotiate such bonds or notes as shall be in the best interest of the MVD, to additionally participate in the state revolving fund established for this purpose, and or to participate in existing or future economic funding to allow the Board of Commissioners to expend such monies as become available, and to authorize the Board of Commissioners to take any other action or pass any other vote relative to said purpose, and to raise and appropriate the required sum of money for the purpose of the 2019-2020 interest on said bond notes. Rosemarie, seconded. Thank you. Like to speak to it?
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to amend Article 3 as follows: to replace the words "the required sum of money" with the specific dollar amount of $260,000, $260,388.89.
Do we have a second? Thank you.
This is a housekeeping item required by the New Hampshire Department of Revenue Administration as, quote, "there must always be a some certain amount when raising and appropriating." This amount, $260,388.89, is the interest on a $10.9 million bond at 4% interest for 20-year term, which is the reasonable expectation should Article 3 pass.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor of the amendment? Thank you. All opposed? Thank you. The amendment passes. Is there any other discussion on the article as amended? Thank you. Seeing none, I am going to open the polls at this time. Hold on. Okay. You will, yeah. You will be voting on each article. It doesn't matter what box you put them in. You will only be allowed to put in one of each ballot. So if a friend gave you a ballot, throw it out. And once you're done, sit back down. They won't be counted for an hour from now. And we will continue once everyone's sitting down. Thank you. Yep, and Article 1 also. Polls are open. $8:49. Yes, certainly the speakers, yes. You know what I was thinking? Should we change the name? I think we will. Yes.
The only one we piloted was we decided we're going to do, and that was all, that was more by total rate increases that were shown there was 80%, 79, so that's almost double, not quite. Just because the rates are so low. Until you have this,
Hello? Hello? Can I have your attention, please? Can I have your attention, please? If you happen to have received one of the election for officers without anything on the inside, please come see someone up at the front desk. There's supposed to be some names in there. Thank you. Yep, yeah. Wow, how many of those? You know? If you want, I'll take your ballots down. If you want to vote, I'll walk them down for you. I won't look. Oops, sorry. Yep.
I've got a question for you. I don't know if you know the answer or not. When they did the rate study, did anybody take a look at the impact of the increase of the amount of water that would be consumed and billed, and whether there would be any decline in that? Because typically when you get something like this, when you drop like that, people start cutting the faucet. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, that impacts your revenue stream. Nowhere to go. My dad used to work for a newspaper. Okay, and every time, well, the story is, a new company bought the paper he worked for. They wanted to increase the price of the subscription. So the guy says, okay, so how much is it going to cost us in lost circulation? So the MVA guy, the MVA was there, all the big, look out the calculators and start punching numbers in. My dad looks the guy straight in the eye and says, well, there's 20%. How do you do that? That's right. Okay, so whenever something like this happens, the first thing I'm looking for is there going to be an impact on the
Did you want to cast those? Okay. Yep. If we could have people return to their seats, we'd like to continue with the meeting. I got one. We still have some more business to continue with here. If we could get people back in their seats. Going to make a remark about the second half. Dim the lights in the theater to get everyone. Yeah. Second call, could people please get back into their seats so we can continue the meeting? $9:49. 9:49. Waiting for two commissioners. There's one. Could I please have quiet? I'm about to continue the meeting with Article 4. Thank you. Article 4, to see if the Merrimack Village District will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $3,853,343 for general municipal operations for the 2019-2020 fiscal year, with said sum to come from water-related charges. This article does not include appropriations contained in special or individual articles addressed separately. Do I have a motion to move?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? On the article. Wolf? Okay. There's no discussion on it? Any comments on Article 4?
Hi, Brian Landrigan, Page Drive. The language here says, in words, 3,853,343, but the number says 3,853,943. Could we just get a clarification of which one it is? Thank you.
We're coming up with a clarification, and we will need an amendment if it is to clarify. The numeric?
The numeric number is correct.
Okay. Would someone like to entertain an amendment to change the wording to match? Okay. With a second?
Second.
Thank you. So we are changing the wording to match the numeric figure. All in favor? Thank you. Opposed? Okay. That motion passes. So it will read, the wording will read the same as the numeric number there. Thank you. Any other discussion on Article 4? Need a bigger briefcase.
Yeah, I know. Thanks, Brian, appreciate it. Bill Boyd, 139 Joppa Road. Can we talk about the fiscal year budget summary that was handed out to us? Is that?
Yes.
That's the more line, okay. On page 2, line item 6,300 under water purchase, why is the district seeking an additional $15,000 from what was approved last year, and what for?
Here, this was the budget. We're asking for this now, after the actuals.
With wells 4 and 5 down, we've actually constructed a booster station to the Pennachuck system, from the Pennachuck system.
And the booster station's down on 101A, was that the construction?
Yes,
Okay, okay.
yes. So we've had an additional, we've needed the water during peak times.
So we're currently buying water at that location when needed from Pennachuck, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Page 3 and 4, when I add up the aggregate amounts of monies for repair and maintenance, I get an amount of roughly $360,552. And my question to you is, for a district that provides water to close to 70% of the community, is that an adequate amount of money that needs to be allocated for maintaining our water system here in Merrimack? Because it just seems very low.
That is just the R&M for the day-to-day operations.
I'm sorry, R&M?
Repairs and maintenance.
Thank you.
For the day-to-day. We have the capital reserve funds that we use for larger scale capital projects, and also within the budget, if something is being done as a capital budget expense, it would then be found on page 6, account number
950, which
Yes.
was my next question. What is the current balance?
That's the capital budget expense.
Right, what's the current balance of the capital reserve fund?
As of the end of February, our total capital reserves, which is a combination of 3 accounts for the acquisition of land, equipment, and facilities, and the system development charge, are totaling almost $5.8 million.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Any other questions on Article 4? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All in favor of Article 4, please raise your cards. Thank you. All opposed? Article 4 passes. Article 5. Shall the Merrimack Village District vote to establish a contingency fund pursuant to RSA 52:4-A by raising and appropriating the amount of $20,000 to meet the cost of unanticipated expenses that may arise during the fiscal year 2019-2020, with said funds to come from water fees? Second. Thank you. Discussion? No comments? Okay. Any discussion from the floor? Seeing none, all in favor of Article 5? Thank you. All opposed? Thank you. Article passes. Article 6, shall the Merrimack Village District vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $50,070 under provisions of RSA 35:1, 1 and 2 to add to the district's System Development Capital Reserve Fund for the future system expansion and improvement of the existing system. The sum to come from the fiscal 2017-2018 surplus fund balance. These are system development changes collected during the 2017-2018 budget year.
Question?
Second. Thank you. Any comments? Nope. Any discussion from the floor? All in favor of Article 6? Thank you. All opposed? Motion or article passes. Article 7, shall the Merrimack Village District vote to establish a capital reserve fund under provisions of RSA 35:1(5) for the purpose of extraordinary legal fees and expenses relating to present or foreseeable litigation, unforeseen legal expenses involving the Merrimack Village District or its officers and employees, and raise and appropriate the sum of $100,000 to be placed in this fund. The sum will come from the surplus fund balances. Further, to appoint the Board of Commissioners as agents to expend from this capital reserve fund.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. Any discussion?
Yeah, I just want to mention that this reserve fund is not only for defense and litigation, but it can also be used in seeking damages in the future. So there's two purposes for this fund.
Any questions or discussions from the floor?
Hi, Tom Koenig, 1 Danforth Road. I mean, it must be terribly obvious, but this doesn't sound like a capital reserve expenditure. You're talking about legal fees. How does that qualify as a capital reserve fund?
You are allowed to establish capital reserve funds for unexpected, extraordinary legal fees. Because in our budgeting, historically, we had been putting in perhaps $10,000 a year. And in the last few years, when various situations have arose, we spent over $75,000. So in order to avoid disrupting our operational budget, we're looking to put funds in here for the unexpected, as Commissioner Venture mentioned, to defend ourselves, but also if we are to pursue damages.
I have no problem with what you're wanting to do. I'm just curious about the capital reserve name, because it's obviously not capital that you're spending the money on. But you're saying the law says that it's okay
Yes.
to
Yes.
hold funds for legal fees and call it a capital reserve.
Yes.
Yeah, so that would be similar to the town's milfoil capital or expendable fund as opposed to a capital reserve fund, maybe. Maybe the naming could be different. I don't know if the law requires you to call it a capital reserve fund, but it's somewhat misleading to me and maybe to others.
The wording for this came right out of the RSA.
Interesting. Thank you.
Hi, Barbara Healy, 68 Back River Road. Regarding the wording and the question that was asked previously as to whether this was litigation against MVD or MVD pursuing litigation, can we add wording to the article as an amendment that adds those words as well, that it also is to be used for MVD pursuing litigation? Thank you. Do I need to make a motion for that?
If you want to make a motion.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I need that in writing.
Okay.
Right now. I kind of, I need to convey it back to everyone, so.
Oh, you got it, Mark? Yeah. Oh, okay.
Right after. Or to pursue litigation. Okay. So I have an amendment. I don't have a second yet. Well, actually, sorry, Bill, you did second it. So we are discussing the amendment that is proposed to add or to pursue litigation after its officers and employees. Is there any discussion on the amendment?
Thank you. Chris Christensen, 27 Great Stone Drive. One of my other hats is to be trustee of trust funds. So when money is put into a capital reserve fund, the trustees manage the money and have some level of approval over the expenditure. Usually it's done as a reimbursement, but in this particular case, we're looking at tightening up perhaps or being overly specific in the language of the article, so I would not support the amendment. The other issue raised by Mr. Koenig, one other word for capital reserve funds, is expendable trust funds.
Thank you.
Tom Mahon, 31 Natticook Road. As part of the state law that establishes governing bodies, you're a corporate entity and you have the ability to sue and be sued under that. So that's inherent in what you do and how you do it. Of course, the issue of paying is another matter, okay? But, you know, DRA may look at this as something as being, and I'm not saying they will, but the potential is that they could consider that to be prospective in some fashion and not fall under, I don't have the language of the statute in front of me that authorizes this type of a capital reserve fund, but it as a prospective thing, they may frown on it, okay, which is no big deal, but that's what they do. But you know, just from my own experience in this, you better, you know, you got to be prepared for that. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion on the amendment?
If I may have a comment?
Yep.
So the language in the article already says, or unforeseen legal expenses. You could argue that this clearly includes going after third parties on, you know, for damages. So I'm not really sure if an amendment is needed.
Any other discussions or comments on the amendment? All right, we are voting on the amendment to add or to pursue litigation. All in favor of the amendment? You have to make this close, don't you? Okay. All opposed? It passes. So now we are back to Article 7 as amended. Is there any comments? Okay, we will call the question. All in favor of Article 7? Thank you. All opposed? Article passes. We are done with the articles. The polls will remain open until 9:49 this evening, at which time they will be tabulated and the results will be announced. You're welcome to stay. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. One more. We have one more, a couple other things here I forgot about. So hold on a sec.
Board of Commissioners and staff of the MVD would like to extend sincere appreciation to Chip Keller. After 12 years of dedicated service to the commission, Chip is retiring. He's doing Florida in the winter, Maine in the summers, playing golf, sunning on the beach. His service to the volunteers to be on commission is with much gratitude that we thank his dedication. Your contributions through the years has been invaluable, and you would be missed as a part of the MVD. Chip, would you come up here for a minute? Thank you. Presented to Chip Keller, 2019, in appreciation for over 12 years of service as Commissioner to the Merrimack Village District. Thank you for your service. Thank you. I have one other announcement to make. We'd also like to extend our heartfelt thank you to Rita Poynton. As the recording secretary for the past 24 years, she has played an integral part of MVD proceedings and will be preserved for years to come. Rita is resigning her position as secretary. And Rita, would you come up here, please? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mark.
Tim?
Tim, 10A, 5 Windy Hollow Circle. Would a motion to restrict reconsideration of Articles 2 and 3 be in order?
Sure.
I so moved.
Seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion passes.